now we're going to talk about conducting PCIs and PCAs. PCIs are pre-treatment compliance inspections, and PCAs are pre-treatment compliance audits. So what's the difference between a PCI and a PCA? A PCA is usually done in conjunction or right before an MPDS permit, and it's more intensive. You ask more questions. And a PCI is more an inspection of implementation procedures. And an audit, you would review legal authority and enforcement response plans, and then an inspection is abbreviated. And then the frequency, how it's decided upon, that's all, it's designated by your 106 funding, your performance partnership agreements, compliance monitoring strategy goals. So it changes and it varies. So some states it's one PCA for every 5 years, and then inspections the remainder of those 4 years, and sometimes it's 3 PCIs and 1 PCA. So it varies from state to state. So to review your state documents and agreements and see what that required frequency is.
And right now it's 1 and 2, right? The compliance one is 1 PCA and 2 PCIs
every 5 years. Yeah. So overall, they're very similar. Like I said, the PCA is more extensive. There's more questions. The checklist is much, much bigger. In a PCA, the interview section can take like 2.5 hours, and during inspections, probably more than 90 minutes. And then they both include file reviews, site visits. But in a PCA, you would conduct more file reviews and conduct more site visits. And like I said, the PCA includes a legal review checklist. So what type of experience do you need? Obviously, you need to know some of the regs, and so that way you can audit people. And you have to understand what the regs say. It would help if you know what are the more popular categorical regs, and know like 433, which is metal finishing, the difference between what's metal finishing and electroplating. And there are guidance manuals on these facilities. So prior to your inspection, if you know you're going to a POTW that has a lot of electroplaters, pull up the guidance manual, take a quick read, so you know what you're going to expect to see. And if you see something different, there might be an issue. So you have to do a little bit of homework before you go out on these inspections and audits. And there's tons of policy and guidance online you can find. So procedures for conducting a PCA. If requested, obviously you would call up the POTW and say, hey, in 2 weeks we're coming out to do an audit of your program. And they're like, oh great, come. They usually like, no, we can't do it. But you call them, you notify them, you set up a time. And then they'll usually ask you, can we get a copy of the questions you're going to ask? And that's fine, because sometimes the person you're contacting is the high-level manager, and he really doesn't know what the program is all about. He has people below him that does the actual work. So the checklist gives them a chance to ask the right people for the correct answers. Because we don't want what he thinks the answers are. You want to know what's actually being done. So it doesn't hurt the process to just go ahead and give them the checklist, because ultimately we trust but verify. So they can tell us whatever they want, but during our sit down and looking through all their documents, we're going to verify those answers. So it doesn't hurt to give them a copy of that checklist beforehand. And there are some pre-site visit preparations. That includes, what I like to do is I like to go on the internet and surf the internet for their location. I go to Dun and Bradstreet and do a business search and see what type of industries are located within that POTW. I'll do a MANTA search, type of metal finishing, powder coating, all the typical categorical industries, that we're looking for. And more times than not, and Jen, people who come out with us, more times than not, I find categorical industries that aren't being permitted. And the POTW had no idea they even existed. And I tell them, I could do this in the East Coast and not anywhere near your POTW. You can do it too. It's not something that you have to actually go out and put your eyeballs on. It can be done at your desk. So I do homework before I go out. And then, and if we had copies of their annual report, I review that to kind of get a snapshot of what I should expect to see. And then other procedures we'll talk about in detail. So in a PCA, the approval authority is reviewing the POTW's ordinances. And we have a checklist, EPA has a checklist that you use, and you can offer that checklist to the POTW to ask them to fill it out beforehand. And it's quite helpful actually for the POTW to fill it out, because sometimes they've adopted that ordinance way long time ago, and they have no idea what exactly is in the ordinance. So this makes them actually read the ordinance that they have, and sometimes they assume they have something, but once they read it, it's not there, and they realize it's a deficiency. So they'll go, oh, we know, we need to correct it. Then, as auditors, we'll go back and check their work. And sometimes they'll think it's in one location. They'll say, oh, the requirement for POTWs the requirement for SIUs to notify us of significant change is found in section 2. But in reality, section 2 reads something completely different. So that might be a clue to you that maybe the POTW really doesn't know their program as well as they think they do, and their legal authority. So these are just helpful things to know. And then the checklist. Include checklist with the report. What checklist are we talking about?
The legal authority checklist when you submit the report.
When you send the report to your POTWs, if you find deficiencies that they didn't find during their initial review, you can send that checklist to them so they can see where you didn't find or found things.
A lot of times they'll put on the checklist that they think their authority to do something in a particular part of their ordinance, and when you read it, it's really not giving them the authority, so they don't understand what the regulation is and what their ordinance is saying.
And then it's helpful. There's also a model EPA ordinance. And so, and the checklist, do we have a picture of the checklist?
No, we have a hard copy of it that we put out.
So in the checklist itself, there's the part that's required, the item that's required, and then there's another column that says, this is the language, the sample language could be found in the model ordinance, and it references the section of EPA model ordinance. So this gives the POTW a chance to compare their language to model language. Okay. So like I said, you call them, arrange a date, you have to collect your credentials, make sure you have your badge, you make sure you have all the reference materials that you need, have your CFRs. We used to, carry these 3 big volumes of CFRs, but now I just use an app, which is very handy. I download it on my iPad, and there's an app, so I don't have to carry around 3 big volumes of this. This is also handy when you do site visits of facilities you think might be categorical. And so you go in, you've never been there, the city's never been there, and you go in and you see something and you think it's categorical, but you have something very little, you can open up the app and read the applicability that you think it might fall under, and you can make a pretty quick determination whether it's going to fall in or fall out. So it's helpful to have all your materials together. Bring safety equipment. We bring hard hats. Well, we used to bring hard hats. But we bring our steel-toe shoes, our safety goggles, and earplugs. And any industry that you go visit, they would supply these things to you, but just more convenient to have, like the personal gear, like shoes. You really don't want to wear these clunky over shoes that you have to wear. So make sure you have the right safety equipment. Have paper and office supplies. Don't assume that the POTW is going to have paper clips for you to use and highlighters and Post-its. I have a little zippy bag of everything that you would ever need, like my little mobile office. So prepare all of that before your PCA, before going out in the field. On the back of a PCA form, there are a couple of sheets. It's a program update sheet, and you're welcome. You can fill that out. So it talks about when the program was approved, when there was a last modification. It tells you when you fill out when the last PCI was. So once you have the date of the last PCI, you can go back in your files to see if they responded to your last PCI and address all the findings, and then you go from there. So it looks like this. It's on the back of a PCA checklist. and we recommend that you go ahead and fill that out before you go. It's hard for contractors like us because we don't have access to your files. So usually, we'll call some regional board and say, hey, do you have a copy of the response to the last PCI? Can you forward it to us? But you have access to that, so use it. Use the information that you have on hand. So like I said, you should probably complete attachments A and B prior to your inspection or audit. Oh yeah, you can also ask the POTW to complete this if you like. Most POTWs have no idea when their program was first adopted. They don't have their program documents. They're like, well, the state board should have it. Why should we keep it? But that's another issue. So learn about previous issues, follow up during your audits and inspections. Read their NPDES permits, see if there's any pre-equipment requirements that they were supposed to do. Evaluate local limits, do industrial waste surveys, come up with pollution prevention plans. And that way, when you go on site, you can ask them whether or not they've completed these tasks. We were at a facility this week. We asked them about their annual report. They're like, oh, we haven't submitted it yet. When was it due? January 31st. I'm like, well, it's March. Where is it? She goes, well, all my staff was sick with the flu and so forth and so forth. There's lots of excuses, but they weren't in compliance with the NPDES permit. So we suggested that she call the regional board right away and report that, and then she did do so. So be familiar of what their requirements are. That way, you can flag all of that when you're in a face-to-face interview with them. And also look on the federal website. They might have consent orders that EPA has issued to them. Probably want to follow up with that, see how they're doing, and are they progressing, how they're progressing with that, resolving those issues. And review their effluent monitoring. If you see something out of the ordinary, all of a sudden you're seeing a spike in their zinc, in their sludge, is there a possible new SIU in their jurisdiction that they aren't aware of, and you should do a more intense site visit and reconnaissance of the area. So review all the information that you have. Did the program submit a modification request recently? This would be a good time if you have any questions to ask them about these modifications. And if they were approved modifications, you should go and implement, or you should evaluate how they're implementing these new modifications. So if they decided to adopt the NSCIU classification, which is the non-significant, evaluate how they're implementing that. Are they implementing it correctly? Are all the NSCIUs truly not discharging more than 100 gallons of processed wastewater a day, or are they actually discharging more? So review how they're implementing any new modifications they've adopted. Review their annual reports, like I said before, and we'll talk about annual reports in detail in a minute. Yes.
You've mentioned flow rates in various places. Is that like a maximum flow rate or a monthly average?
Or SIUs?
Or any of the things that we've talked about, 25,000 gallons per day, 100 gallons per day.
So the 25,000 gallons is process flow. Average process flow.
Average over whatever period you could use.
Yeah, long term.
Yeah, it's a long-term annual average.
And then the 100 is it's also similar.
It's at, is it
The 100 is a maximum ever per
Yeah.
day.
per day? Maximum. So you can't have 110 one day and 90 the next. But that's in the definition of NSCI and how to apply that. So you get on site, you of course introduce yourself, you pass out business cards, and then we like to conduct an interview first to get to know the staff, understand the staff, talk to the staff, get to know them. This also gives us a chance to document what they think they're doing, because once, we trust the verify, and then during the file review, that's when we verify what they say. And there's a lot of times they say, oh, we don't have any expired permits, all our permits are, enforceable, non-expired. And then we go to file review, and Lord and behold, look, this one expired in 2013, and how did that happen? And they're like, well, I don't know. It's like, how do you not know? You just told me something else. or SIUs and S&C. They're like, oh, we don't have any SIUs and S&C. But then you go to the file review, you're like, this person's in S&C, hasn't submitted any reports to you for 2 years. How can they not be in S&C? I don't know. So these are like signs of indicative of something bigger is happening. Maybe they're not implementing the program like they think they're implementing the program. And then after a file review, we'll figure out which sites to visit. Sometimes we'll visit the sites that we conduct the file review for, and sometimes we go see SIUs or IUs that they aren't aware of. So it depends. It's your comfort level. If you find something in the permit that's questionable, especially for a CIU, you're like, ooh, their sampling point is kind of questionable. Let me put my eyeball at it and see. And obviously go out there. But if you don't, if you're comfortable with the file review and you think they're doing everything correctly, pick another IU to go visit. And then at the end, you have a closing conference, and you just kind of briefly let the POTW know what you found as a courtesy. So during the interview, we document what the POTW, how they answer all the questions. Some POTWs, once you email them a list of questions, they'll type it out and fill out the answers. It's like, here's the answers, you don't need to talk to us. But that's not how it works. We still ask the questions, even if you have it typed out, we still ask it, and we still want to hear your answer. Because when we first started coming out to California, we would send these POTWs a form, and it has the interview, it has a file review, it has our conclusions and findings. And one POTW completely filled out the form for us. All the interview questions, they conducted the file review. They even completed the findings and conclusions for us. And we walked in, they're like, here you go. You don't need to talk to us, see you bye. We're like, no, that's not how it works. And they're like, well, that's how we used to do it all the time. We're like, no, we're going to sit down and actually look through your files, and we'll make that determination, and not you. They're like, oh, okay. So that was fun. That was really interesting. So in the file review, we always like to make copies of things that we see. At a minimum, we make a copy of a permit, and then copies of anything else that we found deficiencies with. We try to, and then most POTWs have copiers that will scan and email. So we do that as often as we can, because that way we don't have to, kill trees and carry paper and FedEx it to ourselves. So I try to do that, but I would like if there was a deficiency in chain of custody, or sampling errors, or inappropriate analytical methods, I'll make a copy of that as document and proof that, see, this is indeed what we saw, and include it as an attachment to the report. So we're not making these up, we really did see what we saw. And then we include documentations of all the site visits that we conduct when we go out and do these PCAs and PCIs.
How many IUs do we typically do?
20%. But that's in general, but if you have California Sanitation District that has 3,000, there's no way we can do 20%. So it's what's the averaging is that called? It's like,
well, overall, statewide, we get 20%. So if you've got industries, and you may have cities that only have 2 industries, we're going to do both of those industries every year. We go do an inspection, so you got 100%. So
right.
Then you go to LACSD,
which is 1%.
Yeah.
And then so you average 1% with 100, you get 50.5%. That's how, roughly.
That wouldn't be the right way to average.
No.
Not a weighted average.
No, not like universe of SIUs versus, but it's your comfort level. You can only do so much, right? So, like I said, in a PCA, you will probably do more file reviews and site visits than a PCI, because PCA you're spending a little bit more time there. And so, your comfort level.
Yeah, and if you're in the file review, if you're finding major issues with the permits, you may dismiss site visits for this particular inspection and concentrate on reviewing additional permits to see how many problems there are. If you review 3 permits of different types of categories and you don't see any issues and they seem to have all the ducks in a row, then I'd spend the majority of my time doing site visits.
And there was once where we went to a facility and they couldn't tell us how many permits have expired or exceeded 5 years. And they did not have an easy way for us to find that information. They're like, all our permit expiration dates are in a database, but we can't, a very old database, but we can't tell you when anything expires. You'll have to physically type in permit numbers and then look that way. So I spent a good day looking at permit expiration dates. We found permits that had expired in 1980, and they've been extended indefinitely since then. But they have since cleaned up that issue. Because they didn't think it was a problem.
Right.
But it is. When selecting which files to review and which sites to look at, pick a good mixture of categorical industrial users and non-categorical industrial users. Pick CIUs that are production-based facilities. For some reason math scares people, but it's really simple when you just sit down and think about it. So review their calculations. Are they doing the production base right? Are they actually multiplying when they should be adding? Are they dividing when they should be subtracting? Review that. Most POTWs will have a spreadsheet that does that. Sit down in front of the computer and look at their spreadsheet formulas and make sure those are correct. Pick new SIUs. They could be classified incorrectly, new CIUs and stuff. Look at, get a good mixture. And if they have any general permits, review some of their general permits. The contents between a general permit and an individual permit, the content requirements are still the same. They still need to have the expiration dates. They still need to have applicable effluent limits. They still need to have reporting requirements. But for some reason, people think general permits is a permit light and doesn't contain all the requirements. So review general permits to see if they have all the required content.
Do the larger facilities use general permits instead of individual ones? Or
Some have and some have not.
For certain categories.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
laundries.
Oh, right,
You
right.
have a whole bunch of
I get it,
laundries,
I
those
get
are
it.
relatively easy to
Right,
do,
right,
right?
right.
But you couldn't
Yeah.
give a CIU that's subject to production based a general
Right.
permit because that's individual.
I see.
And then another, like if you've been there several, like many years in a row, pick SIUs that you didn't visit or review the year. Don't review the same file unless there's a big issue and you just want to conduct a follow-up. But pick different files to review, different facilities to go visit. So here is just an example of the first page of the file review. And in your handout, this is where the cupcakes come into play. In your handout, you have an example industrial user permit. So
Like the
everyone has
last
that
handout?
out. So we're going to go through this permitting, like reviewing permits exercise and see how well you can pick out errors and deficiencies. Does everybody have this? Alright, so I know you don't have a copy of the entire checklist, so I'll just go down the checklist and see if you guys can spot any errors. So we see that this permit, it's been issued, and the first thing on the the third thing on the checklist is, hey, did they issue permits? Yes. Statement of duration. Can anyone tell me whether the statement of duration on this permit, is it okay or not okay?
It's expired.
Well, don't look at the expiration dates because we haven't updated that. But otherwise, remember, keep in mind that statement of duration is 5 years or less. So can you tell, why are you saying no?
It's an extra day.
Very good, come and get a cupcake. Yay, so you see that a lot, people don't realize a calendar year is January 1st to December 31st. But when they start doing 5 years, they'll go January 1st, 2005 to January 1st, 2010. That's actually 5 years in a day. So they're in violation of federal regs. Yay, he gets a cupcake. So on the first page, are there any other, I don't have enough cupcakes for all the errors, so I'm just gonna pick and choose when you get it. So are there anybody else spot any other errors on this cover page?
Can it be issued before or after it's effective?
It cannot, Jim, very good. But you don't get a cupcake, I'm sorry. I know you
I
too
knew-
well. I know you too
I learned
well.
that from you, that's why.
Yeah, so at the bottom of this page, you see that they actually issued the permit on January 15th, but they made it effective January 1st. So how can you issue a permit after the effective date of the permit?
Magic.
How does that work? How does that work?
Time
So-
travel.
Yeah, so that's a big no-no, that's a big no-no. So other things you should look at is, we'll go with applicable effluent limits. So turn to page 2. Effluent limits. Look at that table and read through and see if you can find any errors with applicable effluent limits. Do the limits make sense? First person who answers gets a cupcake. And you can't get more than one cupcake.
You're demotivating me.
I guess you can will the cupcake to somebody else. This one's pretty tricky. I'll give you a hint. It has to do with the oil and grease limits.
Kind of inconsistent.
How are they inconsistent?
Well, the table says 100 and division C is 150.
I need a little bit more info. You're correct, they are inconsistent, but what else? What else is another red flag? You're there, you're almost there, you're 75% there. You're 75% there, you can do it.
Taste the cupcake.
I know, we can smell
Take
it.
off my glasses to see.
I'll let you off the hook. So on the table, it says oil and grease is a total limit. Oil and grease total is made up of 2 fractions, polar and nonpolar. But then in paragraph C little a, it says that's oil and grease. The polar portion of oil and grease has a limit of 50. So how can you have a total limit of 100, but then you say in another sentence, the polar fraction is more than the total, right? So this flag, so even if you're doing a PCI and you see this, and remember a PCI, we don't do a legal review, legal authority review. You're like, this makes no sense whatsoever. This would flag me to go review the ordinance, see what the ordinance says. Because this is inappropriate. It doesn't make any sense. How can part be more of the total? Right? So, yes.
Can you explain the polar versus non-polar? Because I'm beginning level here.
Sure, no problem. So oil and grease is made up of a petroleum portion, which is non-polar, and a polar portion is vegetable, animals, and fats. So the way I remember is polar bear. So it's nature driven, and non-polar is non-polar bear, petroleum based. I know it's silly, isn't it?
And what's the polar referring to?
Polar is the petroleum hydrocarbons and
Oh, the molecular.
mineral
Okay. Got it.
oils and stuff like that.
Cool. Got it.
Come and get your cupcake.
Oh, okay. Some more fats, oils, and greases.
But they're polar, so it's okay.
Yeah, the polar bear.
Eating petroleum.
Polar, actually, it's kind of funny because I use the term polar and non-polar in a training that we did in Alaska. And the staff there was like, well, that's incorrect. That's funny because we're in Alaska and you're making fun of the polar bears. I'm like, oh, polar means, they're like, we didn't know that. I'm like, so they thought I was being cute, but I'm like, not being cute. It's really how you call them. Okay, so then let's continue on to our checklist. I know we don't have, let's go to the next page. No cupcake for this one because this is relatively easy. Is there anything wrong on this page? And it's in part 2, so there's your hand. So keep in mind, for this permit, the POTW is requiring the IU to conduct self-monitoring. And the federal reg says there's a minimum frequency for conducting self-monitoring that SIUs must do, that we went over already.
Yeah, twice per year.
Correct. So which one are they only requiring once a year? Polar, oil, and grease, right? So if it's a pollutant of concern that the POTW has deemed a pollutant of concern and is in their permit, that SIU has to do it at least twice a year. And in the permit, it's saying only once. Okay, so the next error on this is reporting requirements, which is part 3. quite lengthy, part 3. So this monitoring, this deficiency has to deal with the relationship between frequency of self-monitoring and, yes.
There's no reporting for monthly.
Very good, very good. So you see, they're required to monitor for BOD and TSS monthly, but in the reporting requirements, they discuss when annual reports are supposed to be submitted, when semi-annual reports are to be submitted, when
And when
continuous, but nothing about monthly. So how would an SIU know when to submit their monthly reports? Page 4. Page 4. Page 4 includes another deficiency. I don't think we went over this this requirement, so I'll give you the answer. So there's a federal requirement that says if sampling conducted by the IU is a violation, they must notify the POGW within 24 hours of noticing that violation, and then within 30 days of first becoming aware of that violation, they need to sample and resubmit those resampling results back to the POGW. And in paragraph D, it says 45 days. So that is actually less stringent than the federal requirements. And this again would flag me to review their ordinance. What does their ordinance say? If I'm doing PCI where I'm not looking at the ordinance, this will flag me to refer back to the ordinance. So not only could this be a permit violation, this could also be an ordinance issue, a legal authority issue. So there, you see how all this is tied together? If you find something here, dig deeper. Keep looking. Be curious. I'm always very curious. Gets me in trouble at times. Okay, so then let's go to look for reporting, record-keeping requirements. Tell me if the record-keeping requirements is adequate. Retention of records is in the right spot, but is the requirement adequate?
Well, our records retention is 3 years.
It is. Right, the federal for pretreatment is also 3 years. So this says 1 year, so that's inappropriate, it's less stringent. The permit violation, and once again, I would go and review the ordinance and see what the ordinance says. Sometimes people just don't read what the ordinance say and put in the wrong requirement, but opportunity to dig further. Let's look at additional reporting requirements. Chuck had mentioned reports. SIUs have to notify the POGW of changes that occur. Why don't we read that clause and see if that's sufficient?
Isn't it 45 days?
Yeah, they're saying 90 days.
Is it 45?
There is no time date of when you have to notify. You just have to notify. So it's up to the city what the leeway is required for reporting significant changes. But you're really close. You're in the right area, right general area. Keep reading. Anybody? Anybody read section B, paragraph 1?
They have to get approved.
So it says the permittee shall give notice to the city 90 days prior to any facility expansion, production increases, or process modifications. So it's saying, right, it's saying, so if you're a production-based facility, which University are you, and your production decreases and you don't notify, the POGW is actually giving you more allowance, pollutant allowance than you should be getting because your production has decreased, so your limit based on categorical production base should also decrease. So that's why it's important not to limit yourself to just increases. So we like to say if there are production changes instead of just production increases. For the most part, if your production increases, then your flow increases. But for production-based limits, it matters when production decreases. Very tricky, I know. But usually we have a permit, and we usually have a checklist that goes hand in hand when we do this. We didn't make copies of a checklist for you guys to go through, but usually you'll have a checklist and you go through it like, oh, we found this, check. So we use a check. So we use a check when we find things are in compliance, and we use the numbering system when we find something that is non-compliant, and then we document what was wrong with it in our checklist. But you can use any method of documentation you like, but this is what we found to work for us. And if it's not applicable, you just put an NA. Okay?
Are most of the permits that you see similar, or do they come from a template?
They vary,
Really?
because it's POTW driven, right? So they can have, we've seen one-page permits that is font 8, size 8, you're like, what? And then they put on the reverse and it's horrible to read. They're like, it's all there. And indeed, they're all there, but the font is tiny, tiny, and you have a migraine at the end. And then you have facilities that have a 20-page document, and they actually incorporate their ordinance as part of the permit document. So it varies all across the board. And just because, and if you don't see something, don't assume it isn't there, because sometimes we just overlook things. We always ask the POTW, give them a chance to address any deficiencies before we have to write it up. And so if you think this was really complicated, don't worry, no worries, because there's actually, guess what, a guidance manual. So there's the EPA guidance manual, it's the PCA guidance manual, so it walks through all of these questions, question by question. So there is a part 1, which is an overview of the inspection and auditing process. Part 2 is the actual checklist. And part 3 is an explanation of all the questions, line for line, what you're supposed to be looking for. So for instance, this here, we're talking about response to violation based on control authority enforcement action activity. So if you're not familiar with this process, you're like, I have no idea what that's talking about. But if you flip to part 3 of that guidance manual, it explains what you should be considering in order to check this off as okay or not okay. So there is a guidance manual out there. So if you don't understand it your first time, download it, print it off, and read through it. Like, break it up, part 2 in one hand, part 3 in one hand, and go, page by page, and read it and understand, and it'll help you out with that. There's a guidance manual. This is the cover. It's beautiful. I love this manual. Can you guess who worked on it? Love this manual. So it's very helpful. And then we already did that. Criteria for visiting site visits, for choosing site visits, visit at least 2. We talked about this. Choose new facilities. You can go to the facilities that you reviewed the file for. Ask the POTW if they have a problem with a problematic IU, and sometimes when the state board goes out with the city, it gives the city more credibility. Like, ooh, we are in trouble, and now the big guns are coming. We better clean up our act. Help the POTWs out. Ultimately, you're after the same goal, right? Less pollutants in our wastewaters, protecting everything. So ask the POTW if there's one that you should go visit with them. Help them out. Zero discharging CIUs. A lot of zero discharging CIUs aren't really zero discharging CIUs. I've gone to a lot of CIUs. They will certify that they're zero discharging. I went to one, and they're like, oh yeah, we don't discharge anything. But we do have this little pipe, and every now and then, when our rinses get really dirty, it's not our concentrated baths now, but our rinses, we just kind of plumb into that and discharge it. I'm like, well, then how are you zero discharging? Well, we're not discharging the concentrated baths, but as a 433 facility, those rinses are categorical because the core metal plating processes are happening, so any of the ancillary operations are considered categorical, so therefore that IU was inappropriately certifying that there were zero discharges, and the city never realized it. And because as new eyes, because I'm not familiar with the facility, I go and ask tons of questions. There's a hole in the ground, where does it go to? And I almost triggered a car wash before, it's a big truck wash, and the facility rep was leading me one way, but I see chemicals over there, and I'm gonna go over there and see what the heck those are, because why are you not taking me over there? All of a sudden, he's like, stop. What? He goes, don't move, you're gonna trigger the car wash, and we're all gonna get drenched. Okay, I'll back up. Sometimes it's helpful, but be curious, but be careful. poke around, look at things, and ask questions. And I know Jim has seen me do this in action. I'll act dumb. Like, I have no idea what to do here. Can you please help me? You know? And they will give you everything. They'll hold your hand through the whole thing, and they'll tell you probably more information than they should, because then I notice there's violations and ding, there you go. And like, but the city, because they're always there, they can't pull that off. But as a new set of eyes, you can do that. It's very helpful. It's my favorite trick. I love doing that. Oh, it's also helpful, like, another story. Went to a facility in the PFD, like, this guy is horrible. He's mean, he's old, he won't give us anything we want, he won't give us manifest. You don't want to go there, he's just mean and nasty. So, you know, I play the dumb, I don't know what's going on, and, you know, it's a guy, so I'm like, you are so smart. Can you explain to me how this, you've never seen anything like this before. You do what? You bend it? And you make, what? You know, so they eat it up. I mean, it works for women, unfortunately. You know, like guys probably can't pull it off. But, you know, the benefits of being a female inspector, I pull it off all the time. I just act really dumb and, like, stroke their ego. And all of a sudden, you get everything and more that you've ever wanted. So, use everything that you have. You know, like, if you have to do that, just get to it. Just like, oh my God. But it works, you know. Figure out a way. You know, it's better to be sugary sweet than sour. Like, what is it? You attract more bees with honey than with vinegar. So go in with that attitude. And people are more willing to talk to you and help you and give you the information. Site visit procedures, it's up to what you want and how the POTW wants to handle it. Some POTWs like to notify their IUs prior to coming, so they have the right personnel there to walk us around, and some POTWs like, nope, you know, we go unannounced and that's how we do it. So it's up to them and their comfort level, and up to you whether or not you want your site visits to be announced or unannounced. Remember to have your safety gear, steel toe shoes. If you go into a chemical facility, make sure you have sleeves. You know, like you're working in the lab, your safety glasses, and everything that you need. And typically, if you're going to a food processor, they'll have hairnets, which are always lovely. I used to collect all the different hairnets, and I had a cork board of different color hairnets, and people thought it was weird.
But it still is.
You know, it's cool though. Like, there's a hot pink hairnet, and I have a fuchsia yellow. You know, all those things.
You have to get beard now.
That's you. And then when you're at the IU, make sure you introduce yourself. You know, I'm here to actually audit the city's procurement program, and because they're required to regulate in the non-domestic sources, we just picked you at random, just kind of get a good oversight of how the city is implementing their program among their non-domestic. You know, introduce yourself. And then if at possible, like if you're going, you know you're going to a very noisy facility and you won't be able to hear anything when you're on the process floor, ask them to sit down and ask them to tell you what they do so you know what to expect to see. And then document questions that you might find while during the site, and end with a closing so they can answer your questions, because the facility would know exactly what's going on. So it's always nice to do that, you know, interview before, sit down before, and a closing after with the IUs, if there's any issues too. Things to evaluate during your site visit with the city. Did the city classify this facility correctly? The city classified them as a non-categorical industrial user, but they're really OCPSF, which is Organic Chemicals Specialty, OCP, Plastics and Specialty Fibers. Synthetic fibers. Yeah, so did they classify them correctly? You know, this is part of your job, is, you know, classification. And if you don't know, document and call Amelia. They're doing this, and I'm like, I called Amelia about citric acid on metal. You know, is that considered metal etching? Is it? It's citric acid. It's from oranges. It's not like using nitric acid or hydrochloric acid. It smells good, but if it's etching metal off the metal surface, disregard what type of acid it is, it's metal etching. So if you don't, when in doubt, call Amelia. Have her on your speed dial. Sorry, Amelia.
That's what I'm here for.
Job security.
Yes. Type of pretreatment system they have on site. Are they using any treatment? Is their treatment facility adequate? You know, are they, an interesting point was the facility was doing pH adjustment, but there was no mixing zone at pH. They were stripping it right before the sampling point. How is that pH adjustment? And how would they know how much caustic or acid to add? There was no, you know, there was no mixing zone, there was no meter. How is that adequate? Evaluate that, because the city may not catch it. Process area, general housekeeping. Is the facility just a general mess all the time? So if that is, what is that indicative of? You know, are they really doing what they're supposed to be doing? If they have a lot of hazardous waste lying around, and it exceeds the 90-day hold period, you know, that could be indicative that the facility might go under and leave a big mess on your hands. Time to call Amelia. Amelia, there's some marginally operating a metal finisher that has, you know, 2 tons of hazardous waste lying around. You might want to do a check upon them, you know, things like that. Look for those things.
Call
It's
PCAs.
important. Huh?
These guys should call PCAs.
We also look at chemical storage and hazardous waste. Another funny story, I know I have lots of stories, I've been doing this for a while. I was at San Luis Obispo and just looking at hazardous waste storage, and this was the best hazardous waste and chemical storage area I've ever seen in my life. It was cinder block building, it was really sturdy, and I just made the off comment, holy cow, an airplane can fly into this and you wouldn't have any leakage. You know, this is a great chemical storage. A week later, an airplane flew into that chemical storage building. That was in San Luis Obispo. Yeah, and Katie's like, you would not believe this, but an airplane just hit, would you just, yeah. And the building was fine, because the structure was so structurally sound. The only person that died was the person in the plane. Nobody in the building was hurt. Imagine that. So like, I'm not allowed to make statements like that anymore. But yeah, so look at that. You know, make sure their acids and bases are segregated. I know we're not, you know, we're pre-treatment, but we still want to make sure they're doing it safely. You know, if they have acids and bases stored together, that can be catastrophic if those leak at the same time. So, you know, it's your chance to just help out the PFGW and the IU while you're out there.
Yeah, we were at a facility that didn't have any segregation of their waste, and that was one of the things that we wrote them up for. So the next year when we went back, they couldn't wait to show us how they had separated their chemicals, and all they had done was put a chain link fence between them.
Like, that's not really segregation.
You missed the point.
Yeah, but it was, you get an A for effort.
Right.
Right. And then this is also your chance to evaluate how the POTW inspectors are doing. So, you know, if the inspector is unaware of the facility representative's name, don't know where anything is at, don't know where the treatment system is, that might be a sign that they're not visiting them as often as they should be. A POTW, not in California, the inspector was very proud of his inspection procedure. So before we walked in, he's like, oh, so you'll see this and this and this, and in the back corner, you'll see the treatment system, and they do this and this. And then he was like, I go here all the time. You'll see, I come here all the time.
Oh.
Good. They know. So when we go in there, the facility layout had completely changed. Treatment was no longer in the left-hand corner, it's now in the right-hand corner. And then so I'm asking the facility rep, when did you move your treatment system around? And like, when did all this, she goes, oh, it's 10 years.
Oh.
Yeah, so then you're like, wait a minute, I saw inspection reports in your file. Were they falsified? Because it's nothing. It was nothing was the same. Things that he said that they still did hadn't been done in decades. So, you know, you're like, So that POTW probably should be inspected more often than other POTWs, you know. You have to be aware. Even though it had documentation that they said they did inspection, I can't definitively say that they were falsifying records, but it was very suspicious. You know,
How did they respond when you said?
he goes, oh, I had the facility mixed up. I'm talking about another facility across town. Right, so it's like, okay, sure, okay. And then look for any unusual issues. Closing conference, like I said, you know, if it's noisy outside, you know, give the opportunity, give the POTW and the IU an opportunity to address any questions or concerns that you have. Just let them know that, you know, your observations can change, or there could be additional observations in the report. This is just a really quick, cursory, you know, closing that you're offering. And then you can explain the reporting process to the IU, because they're thinking, so am I gonna see a report from the state because you came to see me? And you can explain to them that, once again, you are here actually inspecting and auditing the POTW, and the POTW will get a report from the state, and if the POTW wanted to share the state's findings, then that would be the POTW's call. And just go and explain, they wanna know, you don't wanna keep their IUs in the dark. It's always to have more information passing back and forth. And so you're done, you're back at home, what do you do now? This is the fun part, you get to dig through all your findings, write a report. You have to generate a report, go through the QA, QC process, enter the appropriate data entry stuff, WIMP, ISIS, all those good things, reportable non-compliance. We've got to upload all that information into the system. And then, are there NPS permit revision requirements? You saw that their local limits are actually not sufficient in protecting the POTW. Maybe it's time to amend their permit to have them do a full reevaluation of the local limits. Maybe their ordinance isn't up to par. They haven't adopted all the required streamlining changes. And if it's significant enough, is it time to modify their NPDES permit requiring them to do that? So you might have, are there enforcement activities required? You found that in their report they were saying they were doing semi-annual inspections. You didn't find any documentation of any inspections, falsifying records. Is that enforceable activity? You have to do all of that once you get back from the site. So your work isn't done after your field work. You have to come back and do more work. There's a lot of work involved. And so if you need more information, look at the guidance manual. And here's some other resources that you can use. Any questions?